Hello dear students, today we are going to speak about neurons. Open your books at page 38, exercise 1. Let's start with the vocabulary. Let's get acquainted with new words, listen to them, write them down in your vocabularies.
Active gene, cell body, cognitive ability, dendrite, densely packed, dysfunction, electrical signal, inhibitory neuron, nucleus,
regulate.
Exercise 1. A neuron is a nerve cell. Look at the picture and match the neuron part to their definitions. Now, let's check and listen.
A part of a cell that contains DNA. One of the short branches that receive signals from other neurons. A message sent from neuron to neuron. The part of the neuron with the nucleus.
In exercise 2, you are to read the title of the text and the first paragraph. What do you think makes this new type of neuron unique? Listen to the opinion.
This new type of neuron is unique because it doesn't appear in rodents and is making scientists question the similarities between the rodent and human brain.
Now let's read the text and watch the video.
the rosehip neuron, a new type of brain cell. Researchers in Hungary and America had been independently studying the human brain when they both discovered a new type of brain cell. The Hungarian researchers had been recording the electrical activity of the brain's inhibitory neurons, special cells that regulate the speed of electrical signals in the brain, ensuring a healthy balance of electrical activity. Over time, they began noticing cells with a distinctive shape that must have been formed by the densely packed network of nerve fibres around the cell centre. The shape reminded them of a rose after its petals have dropped, so they named these cells rosehip neurons. American scientists also detected these cells using a new technique that allowed them to identify active genes in brain cells. The scientists could have continued their research independently, but they decided to collaborate in order to better understand these unique cells. The Hungarian team examined the shape and electrical features of rosehip neurons, while the American scientists looked at their genetic characteristics. While the precise function of rosehip neurons is still unclear, this research collaboration has provided the first steps towards a deeper understanding of their role. Since rosehip neurons are one type of inhibitory neuron, they must be involved in slowing down the speed of the electrical signals from neighbouring cells. Additionally, rosehip neurons comprised only about 10 to 15% of the inhibitory neurons studied and connected to only certain brain cells, leading researchers to conclude that their inhibitory function is very targeted. Scientists believe rosehip neurons have the potential to provide answers to questions that have long troubled the medical and scientific community. For instance, rosehip neurons may well be unique to humans. If so, their presence might be one of the factors underlying the superior cognitive abilities of humans.
In exercise 3, you are to read again and mark the sentence as true, false, or doesn't say. Number 1. Scientists have only recently discovered human and rodent brains are similar. There is no information in the text, that's why it doesn't say. Hungarian and American researchers worked together to discover rosehip neurons. It is false, because they had been independently studying the human brain when they both discovered a new type of brain cell. The third, the shape of rosehip neurons in the brain is unique. It is true. According to the text, they began noticing cells with a distinctive shape that must have been formed by the densely packed network of nerve fibers around the cell center. The shape is supposed to have reminded them of a rose after its petals have dropped, so they named these cells rosehip neurons. Rosehip neurons likely manage the speed of electrical signals in the brain. It doesn't say because there is no information in the text. Scientists proved that the genetic properties of rosehip neurons cause brain diseases. It is false. In the text, it is said, since documentation of the genetic and structural properties of rosehip neurons has begun, scientists can begin exploring whether dysfunction in these neurons causes certain brain diseases or mental illnesses. And the last, rosehip neurons might contribute to the advanced mental abilities of humans is true, because it is said that rosehip neurons may well be unique to humans. If so, their presence might be one of the factors underlying the superior cognitive abilities of humans. In exercise 4, you are to fill in the words. Let's check, listen, and repeat.
Genetic characteristics. Dysfunction in neurons. Genetic and structural properties. Network of nerve fibers. Superior cognitive abilities. Brain's inhibitory neurons.
In exercise 5, you are to listen to people talking in 3 different situations. For questions, you are to choose the best answer.
1. You hear a professor talking about a new discovery in the human brain. Why is he talking to his students?
To sum up, there are currently 2 approaches to rosehip neuron research: investigation of the physical characteristics and exploration of the genetic characteristics. For this week's assignment, I want you to write between 800 and 1,000 words summing up the discoveries in one of these fields so far. Remember, you are only allowed to use academic journals as resources, no internet articles, even if they're by reputable scientists. That's the end of today's lecture, but before you go, I'd like to tell you about an exciting opportunity related to today's topic. My colleague Dr. Winston is currently involved in the genetic analysis of rosehip neurons, and she's willing to take on a research assistant for 3 months this summer. The candidate must be enthusiastic and knowledgeable and be able to demonstrate these qualities in an interview with Dr. Winston and the rest of her team. However, the first stage of the application process will include your homework assignment. So, if you wish to be considered for the position, please also attach a CV and covering letter when you hand in your essay next Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
2. You hear 2 students talking about a documentary they have seen. What do they agree about?
That was a really interesting documentary. It was very informative.
I'm afraid I disagree. It was very well made. The CGI was brilliant, but some parts were factually inaccurate. Like when the narrator stated that humans only use about 10% of their brains. This is a popular misconception, but in scientific circles it's known to be untrue. We actually use virtually all parts of our brains most of the time. Even in sleep during the REM cycle, studies have shown that parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, are very active.
Well, if that's true, it's quite a serious error. You have to admit that the case studies were very interesting, though.
Indeed. The one about the savant, Charles, was intriguing. It's amazing that a 9-year-old boy with virtually no speech could solve those complicated maths problems.
Yes, and it was fascinating that the structure of his brain was actually different from yours or mine. Part of his cortex was thicker, whereas other areas were thinner.
3. You hear 2 scientists talking about their lab equipment. What does the woman think about it?
Don't you think our new lab is fantastic? It's so spacious. It's much easier to move around.
This new lab has state-of-the-art equipment. Just look at this thermal analyzer. It's the latest model, and it's so simple to use.
Yes, but both that and the chemical synthesizer take more time to complete their processes. These new machines may be able to perform extra functions, but sometimes the added steps are just unnecessary.
I suppose you have a point, but we have twice the amount of equipment we used to have, so we can run multiple tests at once. And don't forget that computer program we had installed last week. It's much faster than the program we used to use, so I guess the time we lose testing samples is offset by the speed the results are analyzed.
Now let's check. Number 1. You hear a professor talking about new discovery in the human brain. Why is he talking to his students? He wants to inform them about a job opportunity. B. You hear two students talking about a documentary they have seen. What do they agree about? How interesting the real-life examples were. It's A. You hear two scientists talking about their lab equipment. What does the woman think about it? It has too many unnecessary features. Now let's remember modal verbs. Modal verbs such as must, may, can, should, etc. don't take s, ing or ed suffixes, are followed by the be infinitive without particle to, come before the subject in questions and are followed by not in negations. Don't have tenses in the normal sense. When followed by a present bare infinitive, they often refer to an action or state in the present or future. When followed by a perfect bare infinitive, they often refer to an action or state in the past. Must plus perfect infinitive, almost certain that something was true. We use the modal verb must plus perfect infinitive for positive logical assumptions referring to the past.
Peter has bandages on his head. He must have had an accident.
Can, couldn't plus perfect infinitive, almost certain that something was impossible. We use the modal verb can't, couldn't plus perfect infinitive for negative logical assumptions referring to the past.
I saw your brother yesterday at the cinema, Mary.
You can't have seen him because he has been in London since last week.
May, might, could plus perfect infinitive, something in the past that was possible but didn't happen. We use the modal verb may, might, could plus perfect infinitive for possibilities referring to the past.
They could have had an accident when they did a dangerous experiment.
Be supposed to plus infinitive means should, but it also expresses the idea that someone else expects something to be done.
We are supposed to finish this research paper by tomorrow, but I don't think we will.
Be bound to is used to express that it is certain, very likely that something will happen.
It is bound to rain heavily in the north tomorrow.
In exercise 6, you are to use the word symbol to complete the sentences so they have a similar meaning to the first sentence. Use 2 to 5 words. For example, I'm sure he was disappointed about leaving the research group. You are to use the verb have. He must have been disappointed about leaving the research group. You are to finish this exercise yourselves. Exercise 8. You are to collect information about the different types of neurons. Prepare and give a presentation about them. You are to include name, location, function, and interesting facts. You can use pictures to illustrate your presentation. Listen to the model.
Neurons, or nerve cells, are amazing cells that help send messages around the body at high speed. They help us to move, think, and function. Like a network of tiny cables, neurons carry electrical impulses around our body and help us to respond to stimuli. There are 3 main types of neuron: Sensory neurons. Sensory neurons are found all around our body. They collect information from the external environment using our 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Then they carry nerve impulses from our sensory organs to our brain. Relay neurons. Relay neurons or interneurons are found in the brain and in the spinal cord. Their job is to pass nerve impulses through the central nervous system and link up to the correct motor neuron in order to provide an appropriate response. Motor neurons. Motor neurons can be found throughout our body. They help us to respond to stimulus by causing movement. Motor neurons carry nerve impulses to our muscles to make them contract or relax. The largest nerve in the human body is the sciatic nerve. It is made up of both sensory and motor neurons, and it stretches from the spinal cord all the way down the legs. It can carry nerve impulses up to a speed of 150 meters per second. Isn't that amazing?